Chapter 6. It begins. Thief, thief, thief. Lydia's blood roared through her body. Her face was burning, burning hot, then burning cold, and her stomach turned and churned inside her. I don't care, Lydia thought fiercely. Call me what you like, I don't care. She stood with her back against the storeroom wall, surrounded on all sides by the others in her class, her former friends. Every lunchtime for over a week now, Lydia had had to go through exactly the same thing. They all lay in wait, carefully choosing the moment when they could torment her. The moment when the teachers were far enough away so that even if they did see what was going on, they would only be able to make out numbers, not specific faces. Only the teachers never saw anything, and Lydia had given up hope that they would. And now it was worse. Now it wasn't just the ones in her class tormenting her. People from other classes were beginning to join in too. Thief, 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 they chanted over and over. Shut up, shut up! Lydia thought the words were in her head. She thought her mind was screaming them, desperate but silent. Shut up, shut up! Lydia opened her mouth to exhale, and the words fell out before she could stop them. Shut up! Her words were petrol thrown onto a bonfire. Thief! Thief! Lydia bit into her bottom lip hard until she could taste her own blood in her mouth. She turned her head slowly. They were all there. Anne, Sean, Kwame, Maxine, Barty, Frankie. Lydia looked directly at her ex-best friend, Frankie. Her eyes narrowed and filled with scalding hate. Frankie didn't chant with the rest of them, but she didn't stand up for Lydia either. And surprisingly, Anne wasn't shouting with the rest of the mob either. She stood next to Frankie, their arms linked as they watched. Lydia saw Anne say something to Frankie, which was lost under the chants of the rest of the crowd. Then Anne and Frankie turned and walked away to another part of the playground. Thief! Thief! The buzzer sounded twice for the second lunch session. The chanting of the mob trailed away to nothing. Some were already turning away and heading for the canteen. After all, today was fish and chips day. Some of the others looked uncertain, as if they wanted to stay, but not by themselves. Laughing and chatting, the rest of the crowd finally turned and ambled off. Lydia watched them walk away, as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't even exist. The bones in her legs turned to jelly. She slid down the wall and hugged her legs to her, resting her head on her knees. Her whole body was hurting. Each time thief was yelled at her, it hurt worse than a punch in her stomach, and over the last week she'd had to take so many punches. I'm not going to cry. I won't let any of you make me cry. Lydia whispered the words over and over. It seemed to be working. For once, the tears that always seemed to be stinging her eyes these days didn't run down and onto her cheeks. I'm not going to cry, Lydia said again. She forced herself to stand up. It was time for her to go into lunch as well. Lunch was such an ordeal that she'd skipped it for the last couple of days. But not anymore. I won't give any of you the satisfaction, she said, trying to convince herself. She took a deep breath and headed for the canteen. Lydia grimaced as soggy, greasy chips were slapped onto her plate. Everyone looked forward to Friday's lunch, but the fish looked as if it had died of old age, and the chips were doing the backstroke in a puddle of oil. Anything else, pet? Asked the dinner lady. Lydia shook her head. She turned, swallowing hard. Now for the hard part. She had to somehow get across the lunch hall without catching anyone's eye. Lydia started forward, her head high, her gaze concentrating on the far wall. But that wasn't the worst part. Not by any means. It was listening to the silence spreading before her as she approached each table. Then, as she passed, the whispers and laughter growing, louder and louder as she got further away. That was the worst part. Lydia sat down at a table by herself. She pronged a chip with her fork and began to chew. It was like eating with a really bad head cold. The chips grated down the back of her throat as she swallowed, and Lydia couldn't taste a thing. Barty, sit down and be quiet. At the sound of Mr. Binchie's angry voice, Lydia looked up. The teacher stood glaring at Barty, who held her lunch plate in her hand. From the pinched look on Mr. Binchie's face, she was obviously at the end of her tether. Lydia recognised Barty, who was in the same year as her, but not in the same class. Barty had also been at one of the cosmic meetings Lydia had attended, but hadn't said that much to each other. Mind you, that was before Anne had decided that Barty didn't belong and had thrown her out of the group. I can't sit with her, Barty pointed to Lydia. My mum said I mustn't talk to her because she steals things. Sit down, Mrs. Binchie roared. Barty sat down quickly. Barty, you will sit there and eat your lunch without another word. I've just about had enough of you for one day. And with that, Mrs. Binchie strode off. Lydia returned her attention to her plate, viciously pronging another chip. Head bent, she swallowed hard over and over again, waiting for the lump in her throat to deflate. At that moment, it was the size of Jupiter. A burning sensation on the top of her head told Lydia that Barty was watching her. Gritting her teeth, Lydia looked up suddenly. What are you looking at? She snapped. My mum said I wasn't to talk to you, but I never take any notice of what my mum said Barty. A moment's silence followed. Did you steal the sports cup? Lydia shook her head. I didn't think you did, Barty shrugged. Why not? Everyone else does, Lydia said bitterly. Barty shrugged again. I never do what I'm supposed to. That's why I'm always in trouble. Over Barty's shoulder, Lydia saw Anne and Frankie walk through the door arm in arm. They both noticed Lydia immediately. Anne said something to Frankie, who tilted back her head and roared with laughter. Lydia looked away, her face on fire. I bet Anne's happy now, said Barty as she watched them too. What do you mean? Lydia asked. She and Frankie used to be best friends until you turned up. Then it was you and Frankie, Barty explained. Now it's back to the status quo. I didn't know that, Lydia said thoughtfully. Now you do, said Barty. Lydia turned to look at Anne and Frankie again, watching as they laughed at some unknown joke. And in that moment, Lydia knew, beyond a shadow of doubt, that Anne was the one who'd set her up.